Good lady from District 33.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask unanimous consent to dispense with further reading of House Bill 500.
You've heard the request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the lady is recognized to open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Friends, I bring you forward this House Bill 500, whose intent is simple. Its intent is to continue to protect girls and women in sports and to provide those opportunities that we have had for almost the last 50 years. Every girl deserves a chance to pursue her dreams and excel in athletic opportunities, and to force biological girls and women to compete against biological boys and men will only leave us spectators in our own sport. We have fought too hard and too long to have these opportunities, and the opportunities of which I speak is the opportunity that I myself had. Let me briefly share with you my story. You see, like many of you in here, I was born in the 60s, and when I was growing up, early on, I was asked by many, hey, what is it that you want to be when you grow up? And you know what? Honestly, I don't know if those of you who are younger realize and remember this, but my opportunities were very limited. At that time, in my mind's eye, I thought I could be a secretary. I didn't want to do that. I could be an airline stewardess. Don't ask me where that had come from, but I didn't want to do that. I could be a teacher, and that is something I pursued. But you know what my answer was to everyone? It was, I wanted to play sports. And you know what the answer was back to me? Girls don't do that. But guess what? I held on to my dreams, and I kept moving forward. And in 1972, Title IX, in June of 1972, Title IX was passed. And from that point forward, opportunities for girls and women in sports started to come forward little by little. I was able to compete in junior high, something that just a few years earlier, those ahead of me could not do. Now, granted, I had to leave home at 5:30 in the morning in negative 25-degree below weather and walk because we had to practice in the morning while our counterparts got after school. But that's okay. It was an opportunity that I had. And then I had that opportunity in high school where we even got to come here to Boise and compete for a state, well, we weren't competing, but compete in this, we weren't competing for a state championship, but compete in the state championship games. And lo and behold, then I had the opportunity to play college ball at North Idaho Junior College. Whoever would have thought that that little kid would have that opportunity? And that led to my going to Idaho State on a scholarship. Many women before me came and pushed for those opportunities for me. And I feel that I have worked very hard through a 15-year coaching career to create those opportunities for those who would follow. I do not want to go backwards. We have fought too long and too hard to lose our spots to biological boys. Now, moving on. What does this bill do? This legislation acknowledges that there are inherent differences between males and females, or in other words, our sex. For the purposes of legislation, these inherent differences will be defined as physiological, chromosomal, and hormonal. Further, we would define athletic teams as has been defined to this point, male or female or mixed. Athletic teams or sports designated teams for women, girls, or females would not be open to men, boys, or males of that biological sex. Now, some would say, how do we define this? And it is, or how do we determine this? And it is determined quite simply by the family doctor. The student's internal or external reproductive anatomy would be one basis. And I'm going to go in just a minute and explain how that is actually determined, assuming that that athlete wasn't with their family doctor from the time they're a little kid, and the doctor knew because they knew who they were. It would be determined that way. It could be a normal endogenously produced levels of testosterone that can be verified by either a blood or urine sample, which is oftentimes taken. It is non-invasive. Or it can be an analysis of the student's genetic makeup, simply done by a cheek swab. Any of these options would be accessible and permittable. Now, you're going to be told that there's a pelvic exam required, and this just simply is not true. Assistant Chief Deputy Brian Kane has a report where some of this is mentioned as a possible concern. And as I texted Mr. Kane yesterday to ask if anything had changed from the first analysis, which I received in October, I had received this analysis and had gone through it and was not concerned with that which was in there. He said, as you note, again referring back to me, as you note, there are alternatives. So Mr. Kane acknowledges there are alternatives. He was just saying that the question is what alternatives are going to be satisfactory and to whom, and
Good lady,
I will answer that.
let me stop you just for just a second.
Yes.
Now, if everyone has the document from which you reference in front of them, then it's okay for you to read. But if they don't, then you've got to paraphrase and work it into your argument. So I don't know that everyone has the AG's opinion in front of them, so I'd ask you to proceed as if they didn't. And if you're reading, then you need to ask and they may.
Actually, my apologies, Mr. Speaker. As I stated, that was from a text message to me yesterday.
All right,
so
well,
I will.
All right. So
yes.
anyway, that's a caution. It's just part of the rules that you asked me to enforce. So please proceed.
All right. Excellent. Now, handed out to all of you, you will see an Idaho High School Activities Association medical form. This is the form from the Idaho High School Activities Association that we ask our student athletes to use. If you will note on there, sex is determined through a number of questions, or we can answer through a number of questions on there from this form. One, you will note that first the doctor is required to state which sex the athlete is, male or female. Then they are asked to answer the question, are they taking any medication or pills? Then they also have to answer, have they ever been hospitalized or had surgery? Then if you jump to question number 15, you'll see that it asks about a woman's monthly cycle, when the first was, when the last was, and the time in between, the longest time in between, and they're asked to explain. Then you will also see the proverbial cough test for young men. So there is a means by which all of these sex-determining questions can be answered, and that is a physiological response. This would be handled normally with the family doctor. This is not out of lines from that which has occurred and that which will continue to occur, and there is no reason to, to be concerned. You see, in sports, we have requirements, we have standards, and it is not based on feelings. And we have these in order to participate, to ensure fairness for all. These include weight requirements for wrestlers. It would not be fair for a 115-pound wrestler to wrestle a 165-pound wrestler. We have standards. It doesn't matter how much that 65-pound wrestler feels. He can't feel that he is 115 pounds and then wrestle that 115-pound wrestler. We have standards. We have GPA eligibility. We have concussion questions, extra in-season sport participation requirements. We have physicals and even boundary requirements, all based and necessary to determine a person's eligibility. These standards create a fair playing field, and the state has a compelling interest to ensure fairness. Let me repeat that. The state has a compelling interest to ensure fairness, and it does. This is also true in girls and women's sports. Now, last night I had a fantastic conversation with an athletic director because I wanted to make sure that I understood the process by which is used when there's a question in any of these standards, and even standards which I haven't mentioned. In any of these standards, should there be disputation with one's eligibility to participate in athletics? And so let me just take you through that process, because it's simple, it's already in place, it is fair, and this process would be easily applied to making sure that we continue to keep it fair for girls and women in sports. First, as he stated to me, athletic directors at all institutions in Idaho have a responsibility to first self-report should there be any discrepancy or concern with the eligibility of a student athlete. That is number one. Number two, should a concern, because this question is coming up, what would happen if there's a concern? It's the same process used in every other means of determining eligibility. One athletic director may receive a very real concern from a coach. Maybe they received it from their parent. They take that to the athletic director, and the athletic director then would go to the athletic director of the opposing school, and they would share with them their concerns. Now, the responsibility is on the new athletic director, meaning the one just mentioned, to follow through, as with everything they always do, to help determine the eligibility of that student athlete. If it isn't resolved, the process used currently and set up for the state of Idaho is, it then is taken up by a district board of control. This consists of local coaches, athletic directors, and administrators. They then deal with the issue. And if there's a further question, it would then go to the Idaho High School Activities Association. The process is in place. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. It has worked to this point in all situations of which we're aware. Now, the important thing here is, again, it's a normal operating process. And let me just tell you, interestingly, as I spoke with this athletic director about the concern, should this come up, because I know others have mentioned this, is it even a problem in Idaho? This athletic director told me, oh, we had to deal with this last year. I was thinking we were probably a year away, maybe two. He told me they had to deal with this last year. Now, the biological boy decided not to, in high school, decided not to go out for that girls' team. But boy, I'll tell you what, the coach was concerned. How were they going to handle travel? What was going to happen with the parents, with their student athletes, with opposing coaches? And this coach thought seriously, actually even said they wouldn't return this year if that happened, because they did not want to have to deal with that. You see, what's happening right now, friends, is that we have a situation that will be coming to Idaho, and if we don't deal with it, we're going to force our coaches, our administrators, we're going to force our school board to be in a position that could literally tear not just that team, not just that school, but that community apart. This is not what they want. They want us to handle this. They want opportunities for our girls to continue. Now, it's important again to note that this bill protects the rights and opportunities of girls and women, that we shouldn't be forced to be observers in our own sport. We deserve the same opportunities as our counterparts. I know, I fought for that. Women deserve to be able to compete on an equal playing field as boys. Title IX was designed to eliminate discrimination. Make no mistake, there is discrimination. It would be against girls and women. This is not right. This is not what we are used to. We need to protect those opportunities. Allowing boys and men to compete against girls and women shatters our dreams and steals our opportunities. And we would be reversing almost 50 years of what Title IX has been able to bring forward. I have reaped the benefits of Title IX. Others in here have too. It is important that we protect that. Martina Navratilova, who herself is gay and has headed up many LGBT boards, spoke out about this over a year ago. She was criticized. She adjusted a couple remarks, but this is what she said, because she was, those of you who know, she is a tennis champion. Lots of titles. Fun to watch. An innovator in the sport of tennis, one of which I've kind of taken up, so can't do basketball anymore. Martina said, needless to say, I have always and will always be a champion of democracy, equal rights, human rights, and full protection under the law for everyone. When I talk about sports and rules that must be fair, I am not trying to exclude trans people from living a full, healthy life. All I am trying to do is make sure girls and women who were born female are competing on as level a playing field as possible within their sport. This bill does not prevent biological boys and men from competing in sports. It doesn't. Make no mistake. They are allowed to identify as whatever they want, because this is not about identification or how we feel. This is about competing in the biological sex in which we were born. They would just have to compete on the side of those biological boys and men with whom they look, or about whom they look alike. Now, let me briefly also take you through a couple of things. Remember, there are physical advantages that boys and men have. They have bigger body size, longer limbs, stronger base that is designed for mass power movement. They have denser, stronger bones, tendons, ligaments. They have a larger and stronger heart, larger lungs with a greater lung volume per mass, higher red blood count, higher hemoglobin. They also have natural higher levels of testosterone. These help with things with muscle fiber, carbohydrates, on and on and on, but particularly the ability to generate higher speed and power during physical activity. No amount of hormone will eliminate those advantages. No amount of hormones will ever eliminate those advantages. Make no mistake. This forces female athletes to compete against biological men and boys and destroys our opportunities. Interestingly enough, we all celebrated our women's soccer team, didn't we? The USA women's soccer team. You do know that 2 years ago, that same USA women's soccer team was prepping for tournaments, and guess what? They went up against a 15U Texas boys AAU team, and guess who won? Those 15-year-old boys against one of the best soccer teams ever assembled for women. Why did those boys win? They shouldn't have won, right? Because it doesn't matter, but it does matter. Boys and men have a physiological advantage over girls and women. Make no mistake about it. You will see and hear a picture of the story of 3 of the girls right now suing the state of Connecticut because they have been discriminated against and their opportunities have been lost. 2 biological boys hold 15 state championships that used to be held by 9 women or girls, and they have done this in less than 2 years. The threat is real. It is not made up. Moving along, let me just say that there are differences. But it's important that we have the opportunities that our counterparts have, because there are benefits to sports. Everything from leadership, confidence, cooperation, conflict resolution, it teaches this and so much more. And Mr. Speaker, as I prepare to wrap up at least this portion, I would ask that I be allowed to read a commercial that Nike had run in 1995. It was groundbreaking. It's a short commercial, not long, but it touted the advantages that girls and women in sports received when they participated.
Without objection, the lady may read from and the commercial.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remember when this had come out, I was coaching at UC Santa Barbara. We were so excited. We were a Nike school ourselves. And this was absolutely a phenomenal commercial that touted the benefits of girls and women in sports. It was called If You Let Me Play. And these are the words. If you let me play sports. Oh, and let me just say one other thing. It was young girls who were in this commercial touting this. If you let me play sports, I will like myself more. I will have more self-confidence if you let me play sports. If you let me play, I will be 60% less likely to get breast cancer. I will suffer less depression if you let me play sports. I will be more likely to leave a man that beats me if you let me play. I will be less likely to get pregnant before I want to. I will learn what it means to be strong if you let me play, if you let me play sports. Friends, we have been celebrating 100 years of women, have we not? And our accomplishments, how far we have supposedly come, but I do ask you, have we really come that far? If we're not going to allow us to play sports, let us play sports. And Mr. Speaker, at this point, I would stand for questions, because I'm sure there are going to be some.
You may be right. Is there further debate? Good lady from District 26.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good lady yield to a question?
Will the lady yield?
Absolutely.
Lady yield.
Thank you, good lady. I am just wondering if in your work in drafting this legislation, if you reached out or consulted with any national or international sporting organizations or elite sporting organizations in the drafting, and if you did, which ones, and were these their recommendations for a trans policy?
Lady from 33.
Mr. Speaker, good lady. I did not reach out to any such organizations. I do know such organizations are working on this. However, let me just say I'm very well aware of the NCAA policy, and Mr. Speaker, this might be a good time to mention what the NCAA policy is. It is a permissive policy, and I didn't feel because it's a permissive policy that we needed to address it. What does that mean? The NCAA provides for opportunities for biological men to compete in women's sports, where it says they would first have to undergo a year of treatment. But it doesn't say they have to, it just provides a means by which they could. We have many institutions, particularly religious institutions, BYU and Liberty coming to mind right away, that would not allow this, and yet that is why this is one of the policies the NCAA possesses that is a permissive policy.
Is there further debate? Lady from 26.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you. And I just want to say this is an important discussion that we're having. Unfortunately, I feel that it has not been easy for me. And I did reach out to the good lady early on because as a 7-time Paralympic medalist in 2 sports and a world champion and female athlete, board member of the International Paralympic Committee, a member of 2 International Olympic Committee commissions, a council member of the U.S. and Paralympic Committee, a member of Union Cyclist International's Paracycling Commission, an executive committee member of LA 2028 Organizing Committee, as well as having worked closely with the Women's Sports Foundation and numerous other national and international elite sporting bodies throughout my life, as well as the mother of a young daughter who plays multiple sports. I can guarantee you there is no one here in this room who is more passionate about and committed to protecting women's sports than I am. I want to tell you a little different story than the story that you heard from the good lady from, 33. I too have benefited from Title IX. I was what I call a Title IX baby. I was born the year Title IX was enacted. And never did I ever get told any of the stories she did. That legislation was amazing, and it opened doors. And I was never told, you want to do what? At age 7, I declared that I was going to be a ski racer and ski race in the Olympics, and no one ever told me that I couldn't. I was afforded amazing opportunities because of that legislation. And then after I had an accident when I was 16 years old and thought that that dream was over, that sports were out of my life forever, I learned that there was another great organization, the Paralympic movement, and that as a person with a disability, I could still reach those dreams and those goals. So not only as a woman, but a woman with a disability, I could still be the person I was born to be and go and compete in international competitions and reach that high level, that dream. And never once was I limited or told that wasn't possible. And that was because of great legislation that enabled me to move forward. Well, I truly respect the good woman's intentions. House Bill 500 will not protect women's sports. In fact, it could potentially harm many female athletes who might be forced to prove that they are in fact biologically female, not to mention the offenses and restrictions that it places on female trans athletes. Every policy and sporting organization that I have worked with believe all athletes deserve the right to participate in sports and sporting competition. And Mr. Speaker, may I refer to 2 sheets that were passed out?
The lady may refer to the sheets. Now I'm going to bring up here another little point here. So as we answer questions back and forth, while we can do that as skillfully as possible, bringing up new stuff in an answer that wasn't covered in the opening debate would be against your rules. And so, yes, I believe everything that everybody has a copy of is, yeah.
Thank you so much.
So without objection, the lady may refer to the handouts. And do you want to read from the handouts?
Yes, well, it says, I'm referring to the handout from the International Olympic Committee on Transgender Guidelines. And it says on there, Section C, it is necessary to ensure, insofar as possible, that trans athletes are not excluded from the opportunity to participate in sporting competition. And then the policy goes on to state in Section D, the overriding sporting objective is and remains the guarantee of fair competition. Restrictions on participation are appropriate to the extent they are necessary and proportionate to the achievement of that objective. I ask you, is banning all female trans athletes from participation in school team sporting competition in the state of Idaho necessary and proportionate? Moving on to another handout you received from the Women's Sports Foundation, policy on transgender athletic in women's sports, participation of transgender athletes in women's sports. The policy guidelines state that the Women's Sports Foundation supports the right of all athletes, including transgender athletes, to participate in athletic competition that is fair, equitable, and respectful to all. I can assure you that this bill is not fair, equitable, or respectful to all. As we have heard from the good lady, there are currently no athletes in this legislation or we've heard before, that have attempted to regulate. This is not a problem that we have here in Idaho. It is not needed right now. Maybe sometime down the road, we might need to modify and adjust our current policy, but our policy that we currently have, which follows the NCAA guidelines, which is what was referenced in response to my question, is what is more standard in all elite national and international bodies for regulating transgender participation in sports. Who are we here to say that those elite international and national bodies are wrong and don't know? I can guarantee you in the legislation that we have, the good lady references a study from Sweden on page 2, I'm sorry, I don't have it right here, talking about muscle strength, the Carolina Institute on the bottom, section 11, subsection 11, 35 to 43. I can tell you that that is a controversial study, that there is not consensus in the international body as to whether there truly is a benefit, physiological, after women have been participating in hormone treatment therapy for a year. They don't know yet. We are still researching this. There hasn't been figured out what is right or what is not. And so the standard has been what we have currently been doing here in Idaho. And that is requiring trans women who want to participate in sports have been on therapy, hormone replacement therapy, for a year. Now, sure, if we want to go even further, perhaps we could follow the IOC guidelines and require expensive testosterone tests. I don't know who would pay for it, but we could require those tests of our athletes to prove that their testosterone is 10 nanomoles or lower per liter. Or even further, which is currently in legal lawsuit, which is the IAAF standard, which is 5 nanomoles per liter. That would all entail expensive testing, and it would show that the standard, or where we currently are, or those two more involved and expensive testing procedures, are very more, I argue with you, very more restrictive than what this or very less restrictive. This bill, House Bill 500, is incredibly more restrictive than any other policy that is out there in any of the elite sporting organizations. With all the challenges that trans athletes and trans people and trans students face, the increased bullying, depression, increased number of suicide attempts, this restrictive bill is not the answer to protecting women's sports. House Bill 500 is a solution to a problem that does not exist. I can assure you, not passing this bill would not jeopardize any Idaho female athlete's rights. But passing it most certainly will cause irreparable harm to an already fragile and marginalized community and will hurt Idaho students. I urge you to vote no on this bill.
Thank you, good lady. Is there further debate? Lady from 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the bill?
You have the floor.
Thank you. I have the unenviable role here of following a 7-time Olympian, and I have little to bring to the table other than a law degree. But I think the legal aspects here are significant enough that they really bear being addressed. On all of your desks, you have a 9-page legal opinion from the Attorney General, which outlines in great detail the defensibility problems with this bill. And there are quite a few, but I just want to outline some of those. The first being equal protection violations, and there are a variety of those that are raised here. This bill is unabashedly sex-based discrimination, which under well-established Supreme Court precedent is subject to heightened scrutiny, which means that the state has to have an exceedingly persuasive justification in order for that classification to survive. I see no way that that standard can be met with this bill. Again, as the good lady from 26 outlined, there have been no actual problems that have emerged, but this thorny issue has been outlined by the foremost athletic associations in the world and in the country, and they have found a mechanism to address it that does not require excluding all trans female athletes from participation in sports. These, as the good lady mentioned, the Olympics, the NCAA, the Idaho High School Athletics Association, these are groups that arguably know quite a bit about fair athletic competition. The Olympic Committee and the NCAA arguably know more about fair athletic competition, perhaps even than the Idaho legislature. But given that this issue has been resolved by those bodies, it would be very, very difficult to establish that there is such an exceedingly persuasive justification for an outright ban on all trans athletes that this sex-based discrimination would be upheld by a court. It would not be. This would be struck down. There is no doubt in my mind. There is just no way to establish a pressing need for such a broad and absolute prohibition on trans female athletes to participate. Moving on, the Attorney General also addresses privacy concerns. There is an implicit right of privacy in the Constitution. The state would also need a compelling reason, I think, for the extremely intrusive nature of the examination here. Now, the good lady suggested it would be optional. Looking at the language of this bill, the genital inspection, I put to you, would not be optional. It is an and statement. If you look at page, I believe, 2 of the bill, line 17, where it said, if disputed, and it does not put restrictions on who can dispute. That's another point that the Attorney General outlines. This can be used for harassment. Anybody can just say they have a dispute, and then the female in question must be subject to genital inspection in order to participate in sports. And it is an and. It says in order to establish their sex, it must be based solely on their internal and external reproductive anatomy, their endogenously produced level of testosterone, and an analysis of the student's genetic makeup. That means all three, folks. And means all three. That means if there is any dispute, a person must undergo a mandatory genital inspection. And from a privacy perspective, I am not aware of any other government program that requires a genital inspection for participation, but the notion that this is a hoop you have to jump through to be on a high school girls golf team is pretty stunning. Again, constitutionally, it's hard to see how that could survive a privacy challenge and how the state could possibly articulate a compelling enough need to require the inspection of girls' genitalia to participate in sports. And again, there are no safeguards in the bill to prevent this from being used for harassment or from this process being abused. Anybody that wants to put their classmates through misery can apparently just dispute their gender and force them to go through this humiliating process. Another point that actually I hadn't thought of, but kudos to the Attorney General in terms of raising constitutional concerns, is there's a potential concern under the Commerce Clause because the bill does purport to put restrictions on NCAA participating associations, and they cited some precedent on that. I very much appreciate the good lady's support for Title IX. I'm a big supporter, but ironically, I think that's another one of the statutes that is probably run afoul of by House Bill 500. That's flagged. That's contingent on a pending analysis under Title VII, but Title IX could also likely be violated by this bill. So for all of these reasons, I think this bill does not pass constitutional muster. I guarantee this bill will go to court if it is passed into law. The state will lose, as frankly I think the state should lose when I look at the standards that were brought forth by the Attorney General, and it will cost taxpayers a lot of money and be a further black eye on this legislature that I believe has not won a case in court since 1996. The Constitutional Defense Fund is on a bad losing string, and this is going to keep up that losing string. So I would ask that you give taxpayers a break and not attempt to put into law this bill that invokes such a long string of constitutional concerns.
Is there further debate? Lady from 29.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Idaho already has policies that address fairness and equity for all Idaho high school and collegiate athletics, including for transgender athletes, female athletes, and transgender female athletes. The Idaho High School Activities Association has an existing policy that already covers transgender athletes. The NCAA, the NAIA, the NJCAA, they all have policies on transgender athletes. So this bill is already trying to speak to an issue that has already been resolved. So why do we need 500? Something that has not been covered that was in committee specific to college athletics is what happens if Idaho statute is in conflict with college sports? And also pitting cis athletes against transgender athletes. What happens to the actual elite college athletes if Title IX funding is harmed because we, the legislature, decides to take a philosophical position on a hypothetical high school athletic situation that doesn't exist in real life in Idaho? We should not be jeopardizing Bengal athletics, Bronco athletics, Vandal athletics, or Warrior athletics to unnecessarily override existing policies that are working in our state. Because already Idaho has policies for high school and collegiate athletics that address transgender athletes, we should not be jeopardizing Title IX funding by engaging in a hypothetical situation that doesn't exist in real life. I urge your no vote on House Bill 500.
Thank you. Is there further debate? Good gentleman from District 30.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't going to speak today, but I feel compelled to do so. I was a young athletic director and assistant principal when the good lady from District 33 was a sophomore in high school, beginning her career in sports. I've watched high school athletics throughout my life. My own daughters participated. I just watched my granddaughter participate in the state basketball tournament last weekend. Girls athletics have come a long way. And I didn't think even 5 years ago we would be debating this kind of thing here. We are the legislature of the state of Idaho, and we have every right to make an effort to define policy that will be helpful, that will clearly define where we want to go. I think that we need to and want to protect women's athletics. I think we want our state tournaments not to be embroiled and politicized. I don't think that this body should be intimidated or threatened by things that are not necessarily clear or true. I support this bill. I think it's the right thing for us to do. We are the legislature of the state of Idaho, and we need to make a clear statement about our policies and our feelings. I urge you to vote yes.
Thank you, good gentleman. Is there further debate? Gentleman from 13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Debate in favor of the bill. And could I ask unanimous consent to refer to an article?
The article.
No, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, it's a article dealing with MMA fighting.
Yeah, without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to object only because MMA is not really what this bill addresses high school athletes and college athletes, and
There's
MMA
been an
really
objection.
stands outside of that.
That's all we need is an objection.
It's fine, Mr. Speaker. Could I ask unanimous consent then to refer to the International Olympic Committee handed out by the good lady from 26 and also the Attorney General's opinion handed out by the good lady from 18?
Without objection. Gentleman from 22.
Mr. Speaker, just a point of order. Does the good gentleman from 13 need permission to refer to an article, or
He
as
doesn't
opposed
need,
to reading from
certainly
an article?
not to refer. It's in everyone's possession, and so he may refer. If he's going to read from it, then that is another question. So
Thank you, Mr.
go ahead and refer.
I will. Thank you,
And you have
Mr.
the floor to
Speaker, and
debate
good
the
gentleman
bill.
from 22. I appreciate that. I'd like to start, first of all, with the handout from the good lady of 26, the International Olympic Committee. Item D, the overriding sporting objective is and remains the guarantee of fair competition. Restrictions on participation are appropriate to the extent that they are necessary and proportionate to the achievement of that objective. What is the objective? Let's go back to sentence 1. The objective is the guarantee of fair competition. In the Attorney General's opinion on page 3, men can be excluded from women's sports in certain circumstances. The third paragraph, the court went on to decide whether excluding boys from girls' volleyball teams was substantially related to these important interests. The court considered the evidence presented to it and was persuaded that due to the average physiological differences, males would displace females to a substantial extent that they were allowed to compete for positions on the volleyball team. Thus, athletic opportunities for women would be diminished. In the final paragraph, it says, nevertheless, given the evidence provided to the court regarding the impact integrating boys into girls' teams would have on the equality of athletic opportunity, the policy at issue was found constitutional. The question I pose is, was it fair to those boys to be excluded from the girls' volleyball team? The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is hardly known as a conservative court, said yes, it is. We had testimony in committee, Mr. Speaker, from a state champion weightlifter, a female weightlifter. She has also competed in the world competition at the world stage. And I asked her this question. I said, what type of, I don't know a lot about weightlifting, so what type of weight, give me what type of weight you can lift. And she said, my record was 350 pounds. She said, males competing in my weight class can lift 800 pounds. It's not fair. There is no way she would ever be able to stand on the podium and get a medal for her achievements in that sport if males were allowed to compete. There was a highly publicized fight, MMA fight, where Tamika Brents fought Fallon Fox. And after that interview where Tamika Brents got a broken orbital bone and suffered a major concussion, she said, "I have fought a lot of women in my career, but I have never felt so overpowered, so overwhelmed as I was in that fight." And she said, "And I'm a pretty strong woman. I'm a pretty tough woman." We heard testimony in committee from the Williams sisters. I don't know if many of you follow tennis. I'm not a big tennis advocate, but the Williams sisters are at the top of the world tennis, women's tennis circuit. They competed against a professional male tennis player who was ranked around 220, 225, somewhere in there, and he soundly beat them. These are top athletes. The issue at stake on this particular piece of legislation is the issue of fairness. Is it fair that a biological male should be allowed to compete against a biological female for a place on the team or a spot on the podium? And I don't believe it is. I do not believe that is fair at all. The Ninth Circuit has held. Their opinion is that it's not fair either. And I would submit, Mr. Speaker, moving forward, we, as the good gentleman from Idaho Falls has suggested, we set the policy. It's our job to set policy. It's the Idaho High School Athletic Association's job to interpret that policy and to implement that policy. This is well within our rounds. This is a matter of fairness, and I urge your green light.
Thank you. Is there further debate? Gentleman from 16.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the bill. And to start with, I want to say this, that there have been some statements that have been made with regard to biological boys or biological men. As I am referring to these folks in my statements, I will be referring to them as girls and as women. And I'm not doing it because it's the politically correct thing, and I'm not going to say it because it's woke, but I will say it because it is polite and because it's respectful. This bill has tons of holes in it, as has been pointed out with the AG opinion. Over the weekend, I've written at least 7 speeches on the matter, and quite frankly, since we started discussion today, I've written 2 more. And so I want to say this. With regard to high school sports, there are 8 million high school athletes that compete in high school in the United States every year. And we have 50,000 Idaho high school athletes. Of those that will go on to college and compete in athletics from high school to college, only 7% of high school athletes will go on to compete in college, and less than 2% will go on to compete at the NCAA Division I level. I can understand some of the concerns around elite athletes. 93% of the athletes that are competing in our Idaho schools will never compete in college. Most of them will simply take the value of participating in a sport, in building their bodies up, in learning what it means to be part of a team. And so it seems that we should be providing those opportunities so that those young high school students and high school athletes can gain those skills that they need to go on to college, whether or not they're playing sports, to be an active part of the workplace, a tax-paying citizen. I'll share my own high school experience. I grew up in Mountain Home, and I was a 3-time varsity athlete in track and in cross country, 2 sports. I remember in cross country, I was thrilled that I got the 7th spot on the cross country team. Over the course of time, by the time I was a senior, I was the 2nd runner on the team. And routinely, over my 3-year high school career, I was beaten by just the members of the girls' team and girls from other high schools. Yes, boys' bodies are different from girls' bodies, but girls' bodies are not monolithic, and boys' bodies are not monolithic. And there are some girls that should be runners, and there are some girls who should be swimmers, and there are some girls who should be playing basketball, and there are some girls who should be skiing, and there are some girls who should be cycling. And the same can be said of boys. But we should not be denying athletes the opportunity simply to compete, especially when they're not all going to be, very few are going to be elite athletes. We are privileged to have elite athletes in our mix, and I appreciate that a great deal. But we don't want to deny those opportunities. Finally, I want to speak to the issue of discrimination. This bill actually speaks only with regard to trans female athletes, and it doesn't speak to trans male athletes. I was surprised that the issue of wrestling would be brought up. There's an interesting story about a young man from Texas, and his name is Mac Beggs. And he was a 2-time state wrestling champion for the state of Texas. Mac was a trans male wrestler, and because of his state's athletic rules, he was forced to compete in the league for the sex which he was assigned at birth. Since he had to wrestle in the girls' league, he dominated the sport in high school, ultimately becoming that 2-time state wrestling champion. This bill is supposed to protect girls and women in sport, but under this bill, girls are still going to lose out to a boy, and specifically a trans athlete. This bill will be challenged in court as being discriminatory. Please save taxpayers the expense of a court challenge by voting down House Bill 500 right now.
Thank you. Is there further debate? Good lady from District 19.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good lady from 33 yield to a question?
Will the lady yield?
Absolutely.
Lady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good lady. I was interested, and after hearing your opening and some of the debate on the floor, to go back to really clearly understanding the genital inspection. You're indicating that that's not a requirement, but I'm hearing other folks feel like it is. Can you point to the place in the bill that would basically ease my anxiety about, is this a required genital inspection?
Lady from 33.
Mr. Speaker, good lady. Absolutely. 3 options are given, and really a doctor the family doctor is the one who can make that determination. If you again will reference the medical form by the Idaho High School Activities Association, the doctor can fill that form out. The questions are on there.
Okay.
It's pretty simple.
Lady from 19.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And good lady, could you yield to one more question?
Will the lady
about
yield
that?
to another question?
Forgive me, absolutely.
The lady yields.
Thank you. My apologies. I wasn't in committee. The other concern that I had initially when I read the legislation was the process by which somebody would have to undergo this. Like, is it an accusation? Am I on the basketball court and I'm getting beat? Is it the parent in the stand? Can anyone say, I think you're trans, so you need to go prove yourself before you can go into the sport? And on top of that, then who pays for it once that happens?
Lady from 33.
Mr. Speaker, thank you actually for allowing continued clarification. Let me first say again, the processes are in place by which these kind of disputations are resolved all the time. And I don't mean necessarily to this, but disputations come up in the world of athletics, be it in regards to age, boundaries, even concussions. Are they eligible to compete, say on a football team? But what would happen is, yes, it would basically be vetted, so to speak, through an athletic director And more than likely, we would follow that which we have seen nationally, where it was fairly evident that we had biological boys who were competing on the boys' side, and then they switched. It would be fairly evident that at that point, we have a problem. But you know what? If there's no question, there's no question. No one is going to be subjected to something that they shouldn't be subjected to. And if you have an athletic director worth his weight in gold, he will vet that, as he does with all of the other issues that come before him.
Lady from 19.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, good lady. And who
Whoa.
pays?
To debate?
Mr. Speaker, for that final question was who was to pay for the
Will the lady yield
physical?
to another question?
Mr. Speaker, I would.
The lady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, good lady. The question then was, like, who pays the cost for the doctor's visit or any DNA, genetics, cheek swabs, all that?
Lady from 33.
Mr. Speaker, typically that is something, as anyone who's been an athlete knows, it costs a heck of a lot of money just to play athletics with what is paid just to be on the team. The physical is fairly inexpensive. So to get a cheek swab, to have a physical, if they have to pay for it, if it's not offered, oftentimes they're offered. If they have to pay for it, you're looking probably anywhere from $50, $75, dollars. It is not an extraordinary amount, but oftentimes these things are offered.
Is there further debate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to debate against the bill.
You have the floor.
Appreciate the good ladies answering all those questions. First and foremost, I do want to address a few things that I've heard today and that I read in the very first page of the bill, which is probably one of the most problematic parts of the bill. Well, they're equally problematic, but just because we think that gender is determined by biology is false. Gender is a social construct. I'm not going to give us a Gender 101 lesson today, but I can tell you when I first started to teach a gender studies course 20 years ago, my students would come to class. They wouldn't have a great understanding of gender as a social construct, but I can tell you today people are walking in the class talking to me about gender is on a binary and dominant culture and that there are more than one gender. And I mean, people, the kids, the college students are so much more aware and open today, they get it. And the scholarship supports it. Just because we want to put in legislative intent that says we agree that it's about biology, that is not how gender is constructed. There are some physical differences, of course, but it is the value we place on the difference that matters most. There's nothing more like me on the planet than another person, which is male or female, etc., right? It is the value we place on the difference, and that value we place on the difference has actually led us down the road of discrimination many times. So I'll keep that lesson short, but I did want to emphasize I am not convinced that the bill is clear about the process by which the accusation goes, and it feels very uncomfortable based on the answer I got and the Attorney General's opinion. I'm not clear that anyone. It seems to me, based on the language of the bill, anyone can do that. Anybody can accuse you of being transgender, and then you're subject to the vetting process and then subject to whatever else. My concern, too, then, with the cost is Title IX is to protect all students in athletics, all women, and particular socioeconomic status. So now that puts an undue burden on a poor girl who has to come up with that, not to mention the trauma going through it, the process. So I think that is a violation of Title IX. And lastly, I really appreciated the discussion about the court and how we do believe this is unconstitutional, and the AG has said so. And I guess I did want to just outline this body has passed bills before, and they have been taken to court, and it costs the taxpayers a lot of money. I know there was a court battle about the birth certificate issue, about whether we could change our gender marker. That was a $75,000 bill, and the state lost. There was the agricultural bill about ag-gag, whatever it was called. We lost that. That was $250,000 the taxpayers paid. The same-sex marriage bill, we fought that. We lost. That was $400,000. My guess is this would be clearly over $1 million based on the expert testimony and witnesses we would have to call to basically help people understand how gender and biology works. So I guess with that, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that we vote against this bill, not just because of the cost and the mechanics, but that it is harmful and it is discriminatory. It is singling out folks and putting them on the margin even farther. And that's just not the Idaho way. At least I hope not. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Good lady from District 19.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate against the bill.
Yes, you have the floor. We don't need to ask, if we're changing from questions to debate, then we could call it out, but we're debating. You stand up. You have the floor to debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see a lot of recourse in the bill for so-called violations of this policy. This creates a lot of liability for our educational institutions. I don't see any method of recourse for girls who will be subjected to an internal examination of their genitals upon anyone apparently deciding to dispute their gender. That could be a competitor, a rival, a school bully, a prankster. And it's very clear in the bill language that the examination is required and the testosterone level test is required and the test of genetic makeup. There's not an or, it's not a menu. The word is and. And none of this is part of a normal health physical. It's not going to be part of the physical that athletes do before they participate. It'll be something that they'll have to do additionally once this dispute happens. And I will set aside the question of who's supposed to pay for this nonsense. I don't think $50 to $70 is insignificant for a lot of our families. But I just don't know where else in code we mandate something so invasive, and we're doing it to our young girls. To protect our children from child sexual abuse, we're supposed to teach them that they are in control of their bodies, that they get to control that, and this bill flies in the face of that. We've already heard that the entities that oversee high school and college athletics have procedures in place that are based on common sense and a respect for privacy. I don't think there's a role for the legislature here. I want transgender athletes to be able to participate, but even if you have concerns about that, I think you should be very concerned about what's in this bill. And our young people are watching what we're doing here today. It is breaking their hearts and angering them. And it is taking a toll on our most vulnerable, our transgender children. They make up a very small, maybe 1.8% of our population, but they are vulnerable and they already face family rejection, bullying, and harassment. And you don't have to understand what it means to be transgender or gender nonconforming. These concepts might be unfamiliar to you and something you're still learning about, to understand the deep pain that children are experiencing. The American Academy of Pediatrics reports that 30 to 50% of transgender youth have attempted suicide, not considered suicide, attempted suicide. A volunteer for the Idaho Suicide Prevention Hotline visited my office last week and confirmed that this is a major reason why young people are calling here in our state. So why, with all the obstacles they face, would we lob another attack at them? We celebrated 100 years of women's suffrage earlier this session, and I'd heard the governor speaking about, looking up, I think it was maybe his ancestors as well, but also whether the First Lady's ancestors who were in the legislature at the time, how they voted on women's suffrage. And he breathed a sigh of relief when he found out they were on the right side of history, as we see now. And I think years from now, many of our descendants will look on how we voted this legislative session. Did we vote based on fear and a lack of empathy about something we don't understand? I hope we'll do better than that. I hope we'll be better than that, and I ask for your red light.
Is there further debate? Hearing none. Good lady from District 26, for what purpose do you rise?
To debate for a second time.
Does anyone wish to debate the bill for the first time? Gentleman from 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some of these discussions are really hard for us. Where my values are. We've spoken to them about before, valuing all Idaho citizens and creating opportunity for all Idahoans. All means all. We say it every time, justice for all. Our Constitution, as a good gentleman from 33 talked about, what those rights are in the pursuit of happiness for all. The questions around this don't need to be decided by this body. They can be decided by the Idaho School Boards, Idaho School Athletic Association. They don't need our interjection. They're handling it already. Other sports organizations are handling it already. By placing us in the conversation, actually, for me, puts us in the place of discrimination towards some. And I can't sit with that. So that's my comments. I would urge you to vote no.
Is there further debate? For the first time, then the lady from 26 for the second time. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to clear up some testimony that I have heard. To clarify, this is not boys playing against girls. Our current policy in the state of Idaho, which is in line with most other international and national sports governing bodies, states that the only way a trans athlete may participate on a women's team is they have had to been undergoing treatment, hormone treatment, by a physician for a minimum of 1 year. I can guarantee you, and from reading all of the other science, that treatment has changed. They are no longer biologically or genetically have the same advantages or whatever features that boys have. There are changes to their anatomy, and that is why the elite sporting organizations have set that level and that rule at that. I also want to argue that this is new and emerging issues, and the science out there is conflicted, and so this is the standard now. If that standard changes and the science proves different, I am all for us re-examining, but there is no legislation out there that is this restrictive in any of the elite bodies that I am familiar with or have worked with anywhere. And I am completely against restricting. And I want to go back to what the good gentleman from 13 used, the IOC paper that I handed out, and he read Section D, and he said the overriding sporting objective is and remains the guarantee of fair competition. Restrictions on participation are appropriate to the extent that they are necessary and proportionate to the achievement of that objective. So he used that to say, that are what we're doing, is it necessary and is it proportionate? I think a lot of what this is about is difference. And let me tell you, difference is scary. I know when I was first had my accident, I still, when I see someone that looks different, it's natural, it's a human inclination to be curious, concerned, perhaps fearful. We all just want to belong and be accepted. This bill will not hurt this bill will hurt female athletes. It will hurt currently participating because of what has been brought up and the incredible examinations that anyone could have to undergo. But it will most certainly hurt those that may want to participate, that just want to be included and just want to be a part of a sporting team. I want to just close and use the statements that the good lady used in her opening remarks about that amazing Nike commercial for young girls in sports. But I just want to ask you to use a little different visualization. Instead of seeing young girls there, see a young trans girl that has been bullied and just wants to fit in If you let me play sports, I will be 60% less likely to get breast cancer. I will suffer less depression. I will be more likely to leave a man who beats me. Think about those young girls that have been living with difference their whole life and just want to be a part. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, will the good lady from District 33 please stand and close the debate?
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Yes, let me remind you first and foremost that this bill is about preserving opportunities for girls and women. The opportunities that first came to light in 1972 with a federal law called Title IX. I would like to take just a moment and address a couple things, but I do feel like I've answered it and answered it very clearly. Though things are continually brought back up, the clear answers are there. In regards to the three options when it comes to testing, aside from the medical form, it does, if you read before, it does say may, not shall. And let me just address a couple of the things mentioned. First, in regards to the Idaho High School Activities Association and their current policy. The current policy, as I had spoken with the Executive Director, Ty Jones, on this, actually about a year and a half ago as we discussed the current policy, it's fairly vague. It allows for a young man who wants to compete on the women's side, on the girls' side, to start the process with the drugs, and that's all they have to do with the doctor's notification is start and then wait a year. They may take shots or whatever is required once a week, once a month, or once. That's it. Let me also share with you what also had come within the last 2.5, 3 years. Before the Idaho High School Activities Association, according to the Human Rights Campaign, our policy is not enough. And what they're wanting to do is just be able to identify however they want with nothing required. So, just in addressing that which was brought up in regards to the policies of the Idaho High School Activities Association, let me address, if I may, the Commerce Clause and how this would affect that. It doesn't. This would be Idaho's policy. It would only affect Idaho's student athletes. Currently, there is a biological runner at the University of Montana who had competed very well on the men's side in track. And he, who is now competing on the women's side, had decided to compete on the women's side and has done very well. He competes in the Big Sky. This does not, when they come here to Idaho, when they go to Pocatello to compete at my alma mater, Idaho State, they get to. We don't get to dictate that. We only get to say that for Idaho, our student athletes have to be biological girls and women. Again, let me remind you that the NCAA policy is a permissive policy, and it allows for us to determine this. When it comes to this kind of legislation, guess what? Currently, it's being introduced in 13 states, and another 7 are on board to introduce it, because this is happening throughout the United States. As I found out last night, it's come to Idaho, which we knew it was going to be here within the next year or two anyway. Again, this is about opportunities for girls and women and preserving that which we hold so dear. It has been mentioned that there'll be lawsuits. My friends, there will be lawsuits. And guess from where they're coming? Just like the 3 young women in Connecticut, these lawsuits will be coming from the parents of those girls whose opportunities have been displaced by biological boys and men. Make no mistake about it. Other lawsuits currently are being filed around the United States because of the high school policies enacted by certain states. We will be getting ahead of the game and preventing that from occurring. When it comes to I won't belabor this. I think enough has probably been said. Let me just remind you that the statement I did receive yesterday in making sure that from our good Assistant Deputy AG that I was on track with the information he had given me back in October, that, as he said to me, there are other alternatives. Yes, there are. There are 3 alternatives, and that can be determined between you and the doctor. It is not a shall, but a may. Friends, I'd just like to tell you this is an important issue. It's very important. It's important to me. It's important to you. It's important to your daughters, your granddaughters, and every young lady who wants to participate. Do not dismiss them because they may not play college. The opportunities provided in high school are enough to sustain young girls through the rest of their lives and provide them with the same learning curves and opportunities that our counterparts have had from the very beginning. Please, please join with me in supporting girls and women and vote yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Debate is closed. The question before the House of Representatives is, shall House Bill number 500 pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will record their votes. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine and read the pairs.
Cheney votes nay. Kirby votes aye.
The vote count shows 52 in favor with 17 against and 1 absent. House Bill number 500 has passed the House and will be transmitted to the Senate. Gentleman from 14.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now recess until the hour of 1:30.
We have a motion. Before placing the motion, are there announcements? Gentleman from 12.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker. Just to clarify, Ways and Means will meet immediately upon recess, but not adjournment. So we will meet immediately